Hello, everybody. Welcome to another podcast. I'm Brad Keefer, the Chief Revenue Officer over here at Keen Decision Systems. And this podcast series is Solving the Interoperability Puzzle. And really what we're doing today is going to diving into how Attribution App and Keen Decision Systems are transforming marketing analytics. So again, I'm your host, Brad Keefer. Appreciate you guys coming in as always. I'd love to introduce you guys to Ryan from Attribution App. Ryan, can you introduce yourself and your company?
Hey, Bradley, definitely. Thanks for having me on. I'm Ryan Koonce, the CEO at Attribution, attributionapp.com, and really excited to be here.
Perfect. So tell us a little bit about Attribution. What do you guys do, and why do you think that you do it better than others? I always like to set folks up to give a little bit of your sales pitch here.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, we are the best multi-touch attribution solution for SaaS enterprise e-commerce. So if you have a native mobile app, we're probably not the perfect fit for you. But if you're selling subscriptions or selling into enterprise or selling online, we can probably provide the best solution. And so when we think about that, the fundamental problem that we solve is that if you're a marketer and you're spending money, say on Google and Meta, let's say you spend $5 for a click on Google and $5 for a click on Meta, and you made $8. Well, Google's going to say you made 3, and Meta's going to say you made 3, but you lost 2. And so how do you reconcile that where you can audit the data and really have the confidence that what you're looking at is true? And so, we are model agnostic in the sense that we say, don't discuss politics and religion and attribution at dinner. But, fundamentally, we give you the underlying data that allows you to do what you want, to tell the story that will help you drive, more revenue for more customers more often at lower costs in your business.
So what makes you different than other MTAs? Because, there's a lot of talk right now in the MTA space around what is the right methodology? What is the right coverage? These guys are cookie based. These guys do snippets. These guys do. So
yeah.
What do you, if you cut to it, what do you say, this is the hill we're going to die on, this is the right metric, the right approach, and why is it maybe a little bit different than the others for maybe some listeners who aren't familiar with, all of the debate that you just referenced?
Yeah, definitely. Well, there'll be a bunch of people that say they do attribution that only can attribute the conversion percentage to a source, but they can't tell you anything about cost. And so one of the big disconnects is when somebody says they do attribution, if they can't tell you the real ROAS, that should be a big red flag. I think the second thing to look at that should be a big red flag is, can I audit the data? So a lot of these solutions are just session-based or click-based. There's no identity resolution. There's no way to bind sessions across devices or across people. And there's no way to bind those people into accounts. And so you get into the details of what attribution is, it's actually pretty complicated. And so most of the companies that say they do attribution are just sort of glossing over the issues and providing what is effectively just a sort of prettied up version of Google Analytics, which quite frankly just isn't going to do it if you're really trying to optimize your ad spend.
Yeah, especially when you start to get into MTA and what you can decide on. There was an academic paper that I was reading the other day that was really focused on, the bias that's built into the A/B testing that shows up in Google, which then feeds into their attribution. And it's well, wait a minute, hey, it's really great. Do you think their attribution model is going to spit out hey, this probably isn't a good channel for you? It's always going to say, hey, this is working amazing, you should give us more. And I don't know how intentional that is versus how much of that is just inherent bias built into their models. But we often see brands that are, especially in the D2C space, right? When brands come to Keen from a marketing mix modeling perspective, and they're in the D2C space, they'll say, hey, we've exhausted our MTA. We've exhausted everything that we can answer there, and now we need that strategic driver on top. And I think there's, again, a little bit of confusion on, can MTA be execution? Can it be as strategic as MMM? So, obviously I have my perspective and bias from an MMM perspective, but how do you guys view it? If I asked you the question, where does MTA fit in the execution to strategy, and where does MMM fit through the lens of MTA?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think the MTA is the foundation on which you build the house. So you talked about Google and why they're, maybe showing that some of the campaigns are working or not working. They don't have all the data that we have. They literally don't know what else is happening and what other channels and what the cost was, what the user journey was. And quite frankly, as a business, you have to have the ability to decide whether or not different components are important or not. So for example, is direct traffic important? Do you include it in your model? Are you going to include first purchasers or all purchasers? If you're an e-commerce site, your goal is to get a click and turn it into a conversion almost immediately. You're looking for those first purchasers. If you continue to spend money on people that were already customers, maybe that's a bad idea. And so when we think about MTA, collecting the data is foundational and first. Attaching cost to the user is foundational and second. And then providing a mechanism where you can leverage that data downstream in different systems is foundational third. And so all of our data is accessible in the warehouse, Snowflake, BQ, Databricks, whatever. And, as a, data scientist or as a partner company, you can access that data, which is pristine, and then, do something with it. So can I do better MMM when I have better foundational data? The answer is yes. Can I use that data upstream in something like Segment with a bidirectional sync and leverage the cost of acquisition or the lifetime value and user downstream and other analytics tools? The answer is yes. And so in addition to the modeling itself, the really important component to doing MTA well is truly just building a super tight foundational data infrastructure with CDP-like capabilities and a data resolution that can be taken advantage of across the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, and this is what we really appreciate about your guys' approach as compared to other MTAs, because Keen's been on this journey to figure out, as we use a multiplicative econometric Bayesian approach, and we do that so that way brands can incorporate what they believe into the model. So some kind of how do I take the knowledge estate, which is often informed by an MTA from an execution perspective, from a more granular perspective, to actually take those priors out of the MTA and feed them into the MMM. So for those wondering, why do we even partner together? This is why, right? I can't tell you who and their customer journey and the clicks to get there. My multiplicative approach obviously attempts to do that from the high-end probabilistic perspective. And Ryan's company is really looking at it from this deterministic perspective. And the reality is how do we combine together the probabilistic and deterministic, where I get close to deterministic, but not quite, and they get close to probabilistic, but not quite all the way there. And that's really what makes the 1 + 1 = 3, to use the most cliche thing of any technology, integration partnership that exists out there. But for us, at the end of the day, simplifying it is I can inform a better prior in my macro level model that drives this high level strategy, while Ryan's team is helping to inform that, execution level strategy. Because I think brands confuse the difference between, strategic planning and strategic execution, right? And it's not that MTA is just execution and MMM is just strategy. It's no, the whole thing really is the decision-making journey as you go from the CMO down to the person who's actually putting in the bids, right? And then being able to measure what works. And that's really where we see the systems coming together really, really well. One of the things I want to ask about too here, it's a little bit tangential, is this idea of how predictable can MTA be, right? When you start to think about people behavior and customer behavior, because as you start to think about, more of that deterministic toward probabilistic, what do you think the boundary is there? Because oftentimes the deterministic model going forward is sometimes what people have trouble believing. So how do you take the historic so what happened and turn it into a so therefore in the MTA world?
Well, I think that's the thing that differentiates us specifically, is that the believability is there because you have full auditability. You can look at that customer journey on a one-to-one basis and say, oh yeah, okay, I see why that makes sense. And drilling down on those users, just gives you that sense of trust. And so if you have a sense of trust at the user level and you add those users together, then you start to believe the aggregate, right? And so I think, to your point, one of the things that really makes MTA valuable in the context of MMM is that because you don't have that user level view in MMM, you can look at it and then go back and look at the MTA, look at some of the deterministic data, and align your thinking with the two components. And that gives trust across both systems. And so, there's absolutely a framework where they live hand in hand. And quite frankly, as probabilistic models and as AI become more prevalent, that MTA data becomes even more valuable because, if you're feeding the beast data that is inaccurate or unreliable, it's going to hallucinate. And that's a problem.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where so even keen in disrupting the MMM space, we're very much focused on outcomes. So it's less about measurement. We always say MMM is table stakes. It's measurement for the purpose of showcasing around the office how amazing I was at executing last year. And Keen says, okay, so what? Like, what does that matter? Like, at the end of the day, if you can't turn that into, again, the so therefore, that's what we're focused on here at Keen. And that's where, if you play this out for those who are familiar with Keen, it's this idea that, like, the output of my model takes your measurement as the starting point and then builds the probabilistic revenue forecast based off of optimized flighted, media buying plans going forward. And then what we specialize in is our ability to then actualize that, because we're putting our money where our mouth is. There's so many measurement tools that say, so you should do this. And it's like, okay, should I? And then there's so many media planning tools that say, hey, here's the best way to spend, but they're not willing to actually put their money where their mouth is in the form of a forecast. And that's really what Keen's focused on. So at the end of the next quarter, I can go back and forecast and actualize. I said I was going to spend this way and achieve this result in this environment. And then we can decomp all that to be able to understand, like, hey, was the forecast off because, like, and it could be off by a good or it could be off by a bad. Was it because of our media buying plan? Was it because of some category level thing? Was it the inflation metric? Like, what was actually the driver that was different from what we thought 3 months ago when we started? And I think the missing piece, even for us in the forecast actualization, aligns to what you were just talking about, which is, well, what if it was consumer behavior shift? What if it was a shift in how people interacted down at the people level, right? And oftentimes media planning tools aren't looking at that. They'll often look at, like, reach and frequency and some of these other metrics that, like, try to get to that. But it's like, it's not quite there from what we've seen. And that's really what we appreciate about this partnership, is that ability to look at the difference between, well, I think it's the execution, and then you can say, actually, it was the behavior, or actually it was, and there's a whole bunch of other things you can diagnose using the MTA, even out of Keen's output of that forecast actualization. So again, it's like a diagnostic tool in the future, just as much as we're a planning tool, and historically, it's the validation, right? So for me, I view it through the lens of, like, it's the diagnostic, it's the informed prior, like, it's all of those things is how the world comes together. But yeah, I think the challenge that we both have is we live in this world where, there's MTA providers popping up everywhere and confusing the market. There's MMM partners who are popping up everywhere and in confusing the market. And then there's the MTA that now have MMMs that are just like, okay, guys, like, it's just
well, I'll tell you,
confusing.
we've been doing this for eight years, and there have been a bunch of MTA providers that have popped up, and most of them are gone, and we're still here, and we're still providing great services to companies. So, I think, to your point, it's that confusion is something that we can drill down on and talk about. Look, if you can't measure costs, if you can't tie it to a user, if you can't look at the entire customer journey, and then if you can't do those things like back testing your MTA or MMM, then, you're probably, looking at vaporware or, somebody doing something in a back room that doesn't provide any of the insight that really comes with it.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things you mentioned earlier, I want to double click on, because a lot of folks struggle in this space with, like, yeah, this all sounds good, but, like, the setup costs, I don't know if I have the people, I don't know if I have the team. At the end of the day, I always talk about, like, so Keen has this interoperable platform that combines together incrementality and MTA and media planning and execution and social commerce and all the things. And the challenge is everybody's like, oh, wow, that's the interoperable platform we've been looking for. I just don't know if we're ready. Like, we want it, but our change management, we want it. I don't have the resources to set it up. So give us a little bit of a glimpse into how you guys, solve some of that pain of, do I have the resources? Do I have the people? Am I big enough to do this? Like, address some of those things.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we really think about it in terms of, what platform are you on and who are your customers? So if you have Salesforce, if you have HubSpot, you need our product. It's one-click install to get set up and, very easy on the front end. If you have Segment CDP, bidirectional sync, one-click install, you're up and running, right? You have to connect your ad accounts, obviously. If you have Shopify, one-click install, right? So we have, I think, 14 or 15 different platforms that we live on top of that you can get up and running very quickly. And then even if you're integrating our system natively, directly with us, it's we only need, sort of one data point. It's revenue. We need to identify users. We need to track pages. And so we can provide a very, very robust tracking mechanism. But in order to get to true MTA, we don't need that much. And so getting it set up is usually a day of work. It's not that big a deal. understanding why the data is different from what you've been used to looking at in platform requires some change management and some learning, but that's where the upside lives. It's knowing that you were maybe underperforming in one channel or overperforming in another channel, and you couldn't see it because you couldn't see the full customer journey. And that's that's something that our onboarding specialists will help with, and certainly it doesn't take that long.
Yeah, I think we had the same problem in MMM. I think people have even worse PTSD from their marketing mix modeling experiences of like, now it's going to take me 6 months of chaos and pain to wait 6 months and get a PowerPoint deck that tells me what happened a year ago, right? This is something we address all the time on the Keen side as well. One of the value adds of our partnership is also the ability to take all of that data that Ryan was just talking about, and we can extract it and feed it into our MMM. So it's like, you don't have to do, and then I've got to do the MMM process. It's like, no, the data's already there. The raw data is already there for all the channels, because I think one of the really cool things that I saw in the attribution partnership as I was exploring, like, who should we think about in the MTA space is they're also including things like trade shows and other like channels that are not traditionally thought of in the MTA world. And for me, it's like, hey, we've got structured data for as close to 100% of the working dollars, if not 100% of the working dollars, depending upon your channel allocation. And if that solves the problem for the marketing mix model, I can ingest that data very, very quickly into my platform. So it's like, hey, I've just reduced the cost to get both of these systems up and running. In fact, the cost of the time to get the MTA set up is like, and then I can transfer the data to the MMM. So it's like, you're not doing two separate processes. And again, it's just another value add that I think it's worth mentioning, because without it, it's like, well, then I've got to onboard another vendor. Like, I don't think you do in this case. I can just keep the journey going to that top of that funnel where Keen's really focused. And then at the same time, our outputs can then flow back down into the Attribution App platform. And I think that's one of the value adds of our partner that oftentimes gets overlooked, because it's really about like, how do I take the MTA and feed it into the Bayesian priors, but it's like this process of the change management and the automation is also a powerful unlock for our mutual clients. So we talked a lot about the MTA, we talked a lot about the partnership. I just want to talk a little bit about like you guys, like where are you going next? Like what are you innovating? Like, how are you guys thinking about the next step from an attribution perspective? Like, where are you guys going? And then in addition to that, the follow-up is going to be, where do you think the industry's going? Like, what are people talking about that you're excited about? What do you think, they're not talking about that they should be as it relates to your innovation strategy as well?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, for us, we see this as sort of the golden era of MTA. I mean, fundamentally, companies realize now that it's possible. The skepticism level for some of the other products is high, and as I mentioned, there's a long path of wreckage of other companies have tried to do this and failed. It's hard. What we do is extremely hard, and so we've solved the problem, and we're in a really great spot, bringing on great customers every day, and we're going to just continue to grow the business and lean into that data accessibility and providing that data back to CDPs and to, companies like yourselves that can take advantage of that data and do more. And so one of the number one requests for our product is our data connector, where we drop the data down in Snowflake and let the data science teams at some of these really big companies go to work and use it the way that they want to use it in some of their other systems. And so we're really excited about that. We're doubling down on that. Really, leaning heavily into the HubSpot, Shopify, segment, sort of customer segments. Mm-hmm. And I think, putting ourselves in a position where, as some of the new reasoning models come out with AI, you have to have accurate, reliable, consistent, accessible data in order to use them. And we're the only company that can provide that data. And so we're really excited about the opportunity to get the data down into the warehouse and make it accessible so that somebody can pull in their MM data, they can pull in their MTA data, and the interface becomes almost irrelevant at some point, where instead of trying to build a report or understand the channel allocation mix, you're literally just asking, the machine, what should I do next? And, that to me is the next leap that we're going to see over the next year, where, to be frank, like, we're not going to end up building that piece. That piece is going to exist. But the piece that we built, which is the data collection, aggregation, and dissemination piece, becomes more important than ever.
Yeah, we have a very shared vision in that regard. Like, I'm looking at, like, look at the LLMs that exist, look at the AI agents that exist, and the challenge that we're seeing right now is, folks are like, there's people launching MMMs where it's like, hey, it's a chat GPT of MMM. You type in your question, it spits out an answer, and it's like, guys, you know how it works, right? Like, it literally just goes to find the most logical, fastest answer and then spits that out as the right answer. That doesn't make it right? It doesn't, you don't know when you're typing into that, that it's only optimizing off of $500 million worth of data, when I'm like, yeah, but I've got $15 billion in my system, so I feel like my model might have more informed information, but at the same time, it's still just going to look for the fastest, most logical answer. It doesn't make it the most right or the more right answer. So that's where I think folks are a little bit early to that game, but for sure, we're also testing that capability internally on our side, and like, we're waiting for it to spit out the most right answer and the most logical answer, and then add the visualization, so you don't have to sit there and digest, so what am I looking at, right? So what do I do about this? And that's where we're spending a lot of our R&D efforts, and we're very close to being able to launch some really cool stuff in this space. But I just think it's fascinating when, like, these smaller companies that are coming in that are like, new to the party. You guys have been around for 8 years. We've been around for 15. We've got lots of data, and it's just like, you got these new brands who are like, I'm a year in, I've got 17 clients, and I've trained this LLM. And it's like, okay. You know what I mean? But that's the kind of noise that we're battling every day. And as a marketer on the other side who's evaluating tools, it's like, I don't even know what to look at. I'm getting spammed to death with outbound. I'm getting all this mixed message from the industry. And it's like, guys, I'm just too tired and I'm too exhausted, because I'm also short-staffed to, like, mine through it. And that's where, part of the partnership on our side, and the reason we have a marketplace at Keen, is really just like, how do we take the pain away from the experience of the setup? How do we take the pain away from the experience of the interpretation, and just, like, cut through the BS that's out there and just produce the best result? And that's really what we're focused on here. Ryan, I really appreciate you taking some time to come in with us today. How can folks get a hold of you if they're interested in learning more about attribution, Attribution App? How do they get a hold of you?
Yeah, definitely. Go to attributionapp.com. Easy to sign up, set up, talk to sales, define the best way for you to engage with us. We don't have a rigid engagement structure. It's not all enterprise or all PLG. Again, a lot of it has to do with how setting it up for you would be best. And we'd love the opportunity to, show you what we have.
And who are some of your clients that you can share publicly, just so that way folks who are out there listening, who may not have heard of you guys before, like, who are some of your key clients that you're able to share publicly?
Yeah, we do everything. Like I said, SaaS, enterprise, e-commerce, education. We work with SMU and Golden Gate University. We work with companies like Sticker Giant on B2C. We work with a lot of B2B companies. We work with Calendly and Vendor. We're working with, like, Replit. A lot of new AI companies, getting into the game and finding us and understanding that, they're already doing a lot in the warehouse and they need the data. And so, quite frankly, like, if you have Salesforce or HubSpot or Shopify or Segment, we probably have a long list of businesses that, use our products.
Awesome. Well, again, I appreciate y'all tuning in today. Appreciate Ryan. I appreciate your time as we, collectively as two different vendors solving two problems who believe they can work together, to solve this interoperability puzzle. So I appreciate you taking the time. And for those who are interested, reach out to the Keen team. We're happy to make an introduction, or reach out to Ryan and the team directly. But at the end of the day, the 1 + 1 = 3 here. When you take MTA as the validation and a set of knowledge that can be fed into a Bayesian regression model like Keen's marketing mix model, and then as we produce our media plan and our revenue forecast, we can then validate it through the work that Ryan and his team are doing. So again, creating this closed loop of validation and execution and knowledge transfer. So it's really creating this closed loop system. So I encourage you all to think about how the tools come together. And if you need any help getting set up, if you need any demos of our platforms, again, feel free to reach out. But I appreciate the time again, Ryan, and best of luck to you out there in the marketing world.
Thanks for having me. Really excited to be here, and excited to do more together.